Welcome back into the channel. Today, we're going to be talking about why I love everything that the Seattle Seahawks are doing. I understand that may be an unpopular opinion, but I'll break it down for you. The culture shift that is happening in real time in Chicago and why the Bears might be playoff bound in 2025. And should Eagles fans be panicking about all the talent the team is losing on the defensive side of the football? If you love the NFL and you're not already subscribed to this channel, make sure you hit that button. We are very closely approaching 200 subscribers. I appreciate all your support. Let's talk some ball. All right, so as I mentioned, I want to open up this video talking about the Seattle Seahawks and why I'm a huge fan of the moves that this team has made so far this offseason. Coming into the offseason for Seattle, I wasn't really sure what we were going to see. We had heard the rumors of a potential DK Metcalf trade. I hadn't heard anything specifically about Geno Smith being on the market, and I kind of figured that Seattle was going to make some moves around the edges, hopefully let Mike Macdonald develop that defense and see if an improved offensive line could get this team over the hump and get them to being in NFC championship conversations with a Geno Smith. Now, while I thought that that was the plan, that wasn't truthfully a plan that I believed in, and Geno Smith was going to be coming up on asking for some more money, as in his eyes, he has outplayed his current contract. And I started to really wonder about if you can win at a high level in the NFL, paying Geno Smith not top of the market money, but $45 million a year. Can you give 1/5 of your cap space to Geno Smith and still compete at a high level? And I think that's a fair question. And I really have been pondering that question just overall in terms of general quarterbacks ever since we saw Dak, Tua, and Trevor Lawrence get extended. When I start to think about guys that fall into that, 9 to 16 QB range, your Geno Smith, your Brock Purdy who's coming up for an extension, can you win at a high level while paying those guys at a high level? And the answer, of course, is in some ways yes, but it's a lot harder to do so because the roster has to really work out near perfect. You have to be great at drafting, and you can make that case for all NFL teams, but it's a little bit easier when you have the likes of Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen to, hey, we messed up here, but our quarterback is so great. Geno obviously doesn't fall into that category, and Seattle felt the same way. And Seattle made a move. They send Geno Smith to the Las Vegas Raiders. In return, they get a 3rd-round pick, and then they go out and sign Sam Darnold to a contract that I absolutely love for this franchise. 3 years, $100.5 million, $55 million guaranteed. So here's what happened. Seattle, in my eyes, and in their eyes, I believe, and how I think the fans, and even if you're not a fan of Seattle, should look at this, is the team moved Geno Smith for Sam Darnold in a 3rd-round pick. To me, that is easily a net positive value return on that trade. As well, you got Sam Darnold for $33 million a year and only $55 million guaranteed. So let's just say that Sam Darnold's year in Minnesota was a one-hit wonder. Well, then you have the bridge quarterback that you originally signed Geno Smith to be. And you have 2 years for Mike Macdonald to develop his culture, lay down a foundation, build a solid team. Seahawks fans, I don't know if you are on a good or a bad standing with Pete Carroll, but I agree with the Pete Carroll adage. The GM and the front office job is to make the job for the quarterback as easy as possible. And I also believe that you should build the foundation before bringing the quarterback in. Now, obviously, sometimes you get lucky and like the Washington Commanders and you just hit on Jaden Daniels before the foundation is ready. And you're like, we got to makeshift a foundation on the fly because we got a small window while this guy's on a rookie deal. But for Seattle, Mike Macdonald's going to have that defense booming by the end of this Sam Darnold contract. I have no doubts about that. And we'll talk about the defensive moves that they've already started to make. No doubt about it, though. That is going to be a booming defense by 2027 for sure. I think they'll be top 10 in the league in pretty much every category. That's the power and that's the trust that I have in Mike Macdonald. The offensive skill pieces, Ken Walker and JSN, I think, are 2 very young and very stud players already at their position. I think Ken Walker is one of the more underrated running backs in all of football. Wide receivers nowadays, they're kind of a dime a dozen. There's usually you know, 5 to 15 really solid, productive ones in any given NFL draft class. Look at last year, how much talent was going in the second round, even. But in the first round, you see like 4 or 5 wide receivers go at a time. If you need another wide receiver, which Seattle does now after moving off of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, that's easily replaceable. In the first round this year, they could go target a Matthew Golden. They could go target a Luther Burden. They could target an Emeka Egbuka. I think him and JSN are a little bit too similar in play styles. And I've also seen Seattle potentially going after Cooper Kupp. I have question marks there because JSN would likely have to become an outside guy, and I think he's more served on the inside. But my point being, wide receiver, it's an easy position to find other talent at. The offensive line, Seattle obviously needs to boost up. But when you start to look at what they're doing here, they are building a really strong core. But they're not quite sold that Geno was the guy to lead that core to the promised land. So instead of paying him money and falling into, not the trap, I don't want to say trap because that's too negative, but falling into the pattern that the Dolphins, the Jaguars, and the Cowboys did, paying their quarterbacks in that 9 to 16 range, top of market money or close to it, they said, let's move off and let's get another bridge quarterback in here, a younger one in Sam Darnold, that, hey, if it works out, he'll have outplayed this contract and we'll have no problem paying him. Hey, if it doesn't, we're only tied to it for 2 years. This was a great move from Seattle. Bringing in Darnold was a great move. They're working to improve the offensive line, and I do think Darnold's a little bit worse under the pressure than Geno Smith is. Maybe it's a little overstated, maybe it's not. It's hard to look at those last 2 weeks of the season for Sam Darnold where Detroit absolutely bum rushed the crap out of him and made him look like he was seeing ghosts, deer in headlights again, and the bad playoff game and push it to the side. But aside from that, we were talking about Sam Darnold potentially being the MVP going into the last week of last season. So let's not say that the guy's a bum. He was a Pro Bowler last year, was a top 2 finalist for Comeback Player of the Year, and was in MVP discussions going all the way into week 18. The guy could ball. And that game in Seattle, what he did versus Seattle, that touchdown pass to Justin Jefferson was one of the best throws of last year. So Sam Darnold on a cheaper deal, significantly cheaper, by the way, it's going to be 10 to 12 million less than Geno Smith per year, which is going to save you, 30 to 40 million dollars in cap space by the time this is all said and done. For a guy who could be better, I think that's a home run move. They as well bring in edge, DeMarcus Lawrence, 3 years for $42 million. Listen, I don't know if DeMarcus Lawrence is going to be a part of Seattle's core when they're truly Super Bowl contenders. I don't know if I can envision them making that jump from this year to next, maybe in 2 years' time if they play their cards completely right. But I think that this is a great signing, a veteran presence on the defensive line, a guy who can help sustain a real pass rush. The question with DeMarcus Lawrence is just health. This is a guy who, over the last couple of years, has struggled to stay on the football field. I do think that's why Dallas was willing to move on from him. But again, a Seattle team that could use a really strong edge rusher, I think this was a great move as well. Ernest Jones. Ernest Jones is one of those pieces that I really loved Seattle acquiring during the season. And I don't understand how he was traded twice, truthfully. I don't really know why the Rams got rid of him, because they needed a young linebacker who was fast, and that's Ernest Jones. When the Titans got him, I thought, perfect. Like, he's going to fit right in there in Tennessee. That's a strong defense. They did finish top 5 in most in terms of yards allowed last year, so Tennessee was a good defense. And then Seattle gets him, and I'm like, this is perfect for a Mike Macdonald defense. Mike Macdonald in Baltimore had Patrick Queen and Roquan Smith, but Ernest Jones is no slouch when it comes to being a linebacker. This is a really, really good guy in terms of this position. He plays very well. And 3 years, $33 million, $11 million a year. Again, I think it's a contract that can be outplayed. Same with DeMarcus Lawrence, really. An edge rusher when he's healthy that plays as well as DeMarcus Lawrence does for, what are we talking, under $15 million a year? I mean, I know he's older at this point and is a veteran, but he could certainly outperform his annual average salary. And that's the case for all 3 of the bigger Seattle signings. Sam Darnold, DeMarcus Lawrence, Ernest Jones, all guys that I could easily see outperforming their yearly salary. Sam outperformed $33 million last year. So don't tell me he's not capable. DeMarcus Lawrence, could he outperform 15 mil? Yeah, he's a guy who can get you double-digit sacks if he plays a full 17. Hell, he could play 14 and get you there. Ernest Jones, could he outplay $11 million a year? I truthfully think there's a world where Ernest Jones has a Pro Bowl season in Seattle under Mike McDonald. On top of that, again, there's a lot of young pieces that I really like in Seattle. JSN, Ken Walker, Byron Murphy, Devin Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen. This Seattle core, at its core with these young guys, is solid. Sam Darnold's only 26, so again, if he is the guy, you have a longer runway with him than you did Geno Smith. And you got him for cheaper. Seattle is setting themselves up, in my estimation, to be a potential playoff team next year. But in 2 years' time, this division could run through Seattle. Matthew Stafford's only getting older for the Rams, and while I think they're better positioned for next year, their future is in question every year with this guy. Because when's he going to hang it up? Is there a regression year coming? Question marks there. San Francisco had to move off of a lot of talent in an effort to pay Brock Purdy. And I'm sorry, Sam Darnold making $33 million a year and Brock Purdy making $50-something million a year. Give me Darnold every day. And the Cardinals, there's just a lot of question marks there. Seattle's was already better than them last year. And again, I like what they're doing. Trading DK Metcalf, that's an interesting one. In terms of talent, DK absolutely has it. To not have a single season since he's entered the league under 900 yards on a guy who traditionally doesn't, he's not catching 100 passes a year. This is a guy who is catching, 60 to 70 balls a year, averaging 10 to 12 yards a catch. It's a big play guy, and it's a big body, but maybe he didn't fit in on the culture. That's some of what I'm hearing, that DK wasn't a culture guy there. Will he work in Pittsburgh? I think so, but you got good value for him. At the end of the day, wide receiver is becoming one of the easier positions to replace. And you have a DK Metcalf who wants $30-something million a year, or a Matthew Golden out of Texas who you're going to get on a rookie deal. What's the fall off? How much of a fall off is there? Seattle wants to be a run offense. I think that's very clear with some of the moves that they've made, switching up at OC. Ken Walker's a talented player. JSN is their number one target. So DK Metcalf, in their eyes, could have been their third option on offense, and you're going to give that guy $30-something million a year? He's talented, no doubt. But I think we're in a similar situation to where we were with Brandon Ayuk. And obviously, the ACL injury, that's why that didn't work out for San Francisco, but the guy's not, he's not Jamar Chase. He's not Justin Jefferson. He's not Amon-Ra St. Brown catching 120 passes a year. While he's good when he gets the ball, he's not a focal point of your offense. And to me, this reads Seattle wants to be a run and defense culture again. If that's the case, paying DK Metcalf never made sense. Moving off of him now, I completely get it. I know there's a lot of question marks on this Seattle offseason, and I know that they are certainly a team that needs to focus in on the offensive line, and I completely agree with you there, Seahawks fans. But I love what Seattle's doing. I really do. I want to talk about the Chicago Bears as well, and this is going to be another positive light topic here. Chicago, this offseason, I think in real time, we're seeing a shift in philosophy and a shift in culture for the Chicago Bears that is going to yield massive success. Chicago went into this offseason and into this free agency period and had one goal in mind: focus on the trenches. At the end of the day, it's nice to have flash in players like Caleb Williams, Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift. These are very nice, talented pieces. And when you get them the ball, they certainly make things happen. But at the end of the day, at its core, football is a big man sport. Football is won and lost in the trenches. And yes, some of that comes from me being an Eagles fan, and that's just kind of our philosophy. But I truly believe it to my core. At the end of the day, you win the line of scrimmage, you win the football game. And that is just something Chicago has not been doing over the last couple of years. And that's why they're having such little success over the last couple of years. The NFC North is no joke. This division is an absolute dogfight every single year for the next half decade. You have Detroit, who may have the best collection of offensive talent in the NFL in terms of a top 2 offensive line, a top 5 running back, a top 5 wide receiver, an upper tier tight end, a speedster in Jameson Williams, a top 10 quarterback in Jared Goff. Like, that is a ton of talent offensively. There's no denying that. Green Bay, who always has a good O-line, is always pretty competitive. Jordan Love feels like their next franchise quarterback. They've gotten there. They have Josh Jacobs, who was a Pro Bowl level running back last year. And Minnesota, who may have the best overall roster outside if you exclude the quarterback position in the NFL. And if JJ McCarthy comes in and hits, they could be a Super Bowl winning team. And then Chicago had to keep up. They didn't keep up this year. And they had to look themselves in the mirror this offseason and think, do we want to be the 4th place team in the NFC North for the next half decade with a number 1 overall pick in Caleb Williams, who was one of the most highly touted prospects of all time? And they said no. They brought in Ben Johnson, an offensive mind, who had his pick of the litter, not just this offseason, but the last 2 off seasons of NFL teams. And he chose Chicago, and I think there's some good reason for that. But you got the guy. You got the head coaching candidate. You brought him in. Not something that Chicago normally wins. They win that battle. And I think what Ben Johnson can do with the skill talent that the Chicago Bears have. I mean, look at what he did to Jared Goff. Jared Goff got to Detroit. In his first year, there was no Ben Johnson. And he looked like a middle-of-the-road quarterback. Ben Johnson comes in, and all of a sudden, Jared Goff is pretty consistently top 8 in terms of passing categories. I'm interested to see what happens now that there's no Ben Johnson. But put that aside. Put Detroit Lions talk to the left right now. Ben Johnson coming to Chicago. I mean, you look at the situation last year. Matt Eberflus, a joke of a head coach, and Caleb Williams had 2 offensive coordinators, none of which stuck. This is a prayer answered if you're Caleb Williams. Now, his rookie year has passed, and now he has to learn his 3rd offensive system and offensive scheme before he even opens up year 2 in the NFL. A lot to ask of a quarterback, but again, I think this is one that will stick. Now, they focused on the trenches. They started with the offensive line, specifically the interior offensive line, because they're decent at tackle. They got some young guys that they're developing. Jonah Jackson, Joe Thuney, trade for both of them, sign Dahlman, the center from Atlanta. Boom. Ben Johnson immediately walks in and takes this Bears offensive line that was a joke last year. A joke. Had Caleb Williams running for his life week after week. And don't get me wrong, Caleb wasn't perfect. He wasn't innocent. Like a lot of rookie quarterbacks, especially ones that were playmakers in college, he held the ball too long on plenty of occasions. But that offensive line did him no favors. This offensive line, this is a good offensive line. And this is an offensive line that not only Caleb Williams can have success behind, but whoever the damn running back is. If it's DeAndre Swift and Nick Chubb and they get that Georgia duo back together, if they draft a Genty, draft a Trayvon, whoever they take, whoever they have running behind this offensive line is damn sure to have more success. Thuney will be back to playing guard. The Chiefs had him playing tackle in the playoffs. Former All-Pro guard right here. And I'm not saying that he's in his prime, but he's better than what they had. And then you look at the defensive line. And some people will say that they spent too much money on Deo and Grady. I digress. You have money. You're in free agency. You kind of got Caleb, who you don't need to pay because he's a rookie. Roma Dunze, you don't need to pay because he's a rookie. So your 2 premier positions, you're not really paying those guys. I mean, DJ Moore's got a decent contract, but it's not $35 million a year. You could afford to overspend a little bit to fix the trenches. We'll see if the signings work out, but pair those guys with Montez Sweat, and I think Chicago's got a good defensive line. I love the linebackers, Edmonds and Edwards. Jalen Johnson's one of the more underrated corners in all of football. A good safety duo back there. I'm telling you, man, Chicago, they fixed the trenches, and it was killing them game after game. And that team was better than 5 wins even last year. The Hail Mary from Washington and the handling of that from the coaching staff, and then the Thanksgiving game, the culture was all off in Chicago last year. That was just not a winning culture. But the team had more talent than 5 wins. You run back last season with that team with just a competent head coach, and that's a 6, 7, 8 win team. And I lean more 7, 8. That's a 500 club. Now, this team, I think we're pushing double digits, 10, 11 wins potentially. We'll see. Those NFC North battle games are really going to determine a lot, because odds are one of those teams is going to miss the playoffs. It'd be very rare for 4 teams from one division to make the playoffs, even though it can happen now in a 7-team format. And then if that happens, you're telling me one of Washington or Philly just doesn't make it? I find it hard to believe. But Chicago, man, this is a team ready to embark on a playoff push. And in terms of ceilings, they have the highest head coach ceiling in the division. I think if Ben Johnson works out, Chicago could have their own Sean McVay. Quarterback, they clearly have the highest ceiling. I'm not saying Caleb's the best right now by any means, but I think if it all works out, there's a reason this guy was so highly touted as a prospect. The guy's an absolute baller. Head coach and quarterback. That's a lot of this league. We'll see if Chicago got it right. But you can't deny that Chicago has done everything in their power to make it work this offseason. And before we talk about the Philadelphia Eagles, if you are enjoying this video, make sure you hit the like button. It's the best free way to support the channel. And if you're not already subscribed, smash that button. We are talking football all week, probably 4 to 6 times a week, even in the offseason at this period right now for y'all. So I appreciate all the support. Now, the Philadelphia Eagles. Should Eagles fans be worried? As you guys know, I'm an Eagles fan. This is a topic that has certainly hit my timeline, maybe a little bit more than, the general NFL fan, but I want to talk about it because Eagles fans seem to be very, very concerned about the direction of this team right now. And the Eagles lost a lot this offseason. Darius Slay, Milton Williams, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham likely to retirement, Isaiah Rodgers, Mekhi Becton, question mark there, but the moves that they've made have made it seem like he's gone, and Kenny Gainwell. You look at that, Darius Slay, starter, CJ Gardner-Johnson, starter, Josh Sweat, starter, Milton Williams and Brandon Graham are both rotational defensive pieces. We'll call it one starter. Mekhi Becton, starter. Isaiah Rodgers and Kenny Gainwell weren't starters, but they were both the next man up. So you're losing 8 core pieces there that really contributed to success this season. Should Eagles fans be worried? I'm going to say yes and no. I will say last year's Philadelphia Eagles roster, and I said this in my Super Bowl preview, you could fact check me, it's on the channel. Win or lose, that was the most high level talent on an Eagles roster I had seen in my lifetime as a fan. That was the best roster the Philadelphia Eagles had ever produced, win or lose. They won, and they dominated. And it was top to bottom, that 53-man roster was stacked. And there were free agents. And after you win a Super Bowl, you do not get to keep everybody. Everybody knows this. There is a Super Bowl tax. If you are a player who has shown you could be a part of winning the big game, other teams want you. And they want you at a high level. The Philadelphia Eagles were never going to keep Milton Williams at $26 million per year. That was never going to happen. It wasn't. And to be fair, it makes sense. He was a rotational defensive line piece for them. Their main 2 starters are Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Milton Williams, when he was out there, was a stud, but he was a rotational defensive line piece. And not for nothing, probably benefited from playing next to Jalen Carter. I love Milton, and I think he could be great in New England. But at the end of the day, who's Philly going to pay? Milton Williams or Jalen Carter? They're going to pay Jalen Carter. Darius Slay, an outside corner, a vet who played it fantastic. But he wasn't the corner one. They drafted Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Those are the guys that they're going to wait, and those are the guys that they're going to pay. CJ Gardner-Johnson, I hated seeing him go. But at the end of the day, if he wasn't a part of the future plan, get value while you can. Josh Sweat, Again, you have Nolan Smith and you have Alex Hunt. These are guys you drafted for a reason. At the end of the day, you can't pay everybody. And the Eagles have chose to pay their offensive core in Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson. They're going to pay Cam Jurgens. They're going to. Lane Johnson. This core is under contract until 2028. They have decided the offensive core is what we will keep together. We have Vic Fangio in a defensive coordinator, and we have a proven ability to draft on this side of the ball. The one defensive player that they paid this offseason was Zach Bond. What's the one position Philly has proven that they can't draft at a high level? Linebacker. Nakobe Dean finally looked good this season next to Zach Bond, mind you, but it took him 3 years to get to that level. Philly has always been able to draft defensive linemen, and they just drafted 2 top corners. They could draft a safety this year. They brought in a Adoree Jackson. They have Kelee Ringo. Young players and rotational vets. They brought in Josh Uche. At the end of the day, if you are the Philadelphia Eagles, what you are going to be now is a team that has to draft and continue to draft well, because they have drafted well, but also a destination spot for 1-year veteran contracts. Hey, I want to win and be a part of something and prove that I still have it. Let me go to Philly. A.J. Dillon, Josh Uche, Adoree Jackson, all 1 year, under $2.5 million contracts. All guys that could certainly produce. There's a world where A.J. Dillon's better than Kenny Gainwell. There's a world where Adoree Jackson outplays what Isaiah Rodgers did. I'm not saying I'm predicting these things to happen, but at safety, Justin Simmons, who's a free agent and has history with Vic Fangio, does he come in and sign on a 1-year deal and Philly drafts a safety to learn underneath him for a year? If I'm an Eagles fan, it's not going to be as sweet as it was this past season. That was an ultimate collection of talent. And right after the Super Bowl, I came up here and I said, that will be the best Super Bowl team of this decade. That will be the best roster of this decade, similar to the 2014 Seahawks. That will be the best version of that. But this isn't a slouch of a team. It's a team that needs young guys to produce. And Howie Roseman and this front office have shown an ability and a history of drafting and bringing in quality free agents on the cheap. And they pay the right guys. So, should Eagles fans be worried about being a contender? No. Do you think that the 2025 Eagles will be better than the 2024? I do not. But I don't think they have to be for this team to potentially repeat. The Eagles are in fine hands, and I don't think anybody needs to be worried.